Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jones Zone. Today, we are blessed with the presence of Blumberg. He is a certified residential appraiser. Those of you that have not subscribed yet, please click on that subscribe button. It'll help get this video out to more and more people. It's tricky sometimes with appraisals. Even if the buyer doesn't have an appraisal contingency in there, which typically they do, I would say, good 80% of the time, unless it's all cash. And even if they say it's not, and they're getting a loan, it still has an appraisal contingency. I have to remind my sellers of that all the time. So in any event, Tom's going to walk us through residential appraisals and how he works. So Tom, you're given an order for an appraisal. Walk us through what happens next.
Most of my work is, I'm just an independent fee appraiser. By the way, I'm Tom Blumberg. I've been doing this for 23 years now. I love the work. There's some things with the appraising we'll talk about that are a little broken, but let's start on kind of how I get my work. Lending work, I have a few good clients. I get the work through a third party appraisal management company. Most of the time it's up to bid, where they'll send it out to several appraisers and say, hey, are you interested in doing this?
On a side note, that was changed from the 2008 mortgage debacle or 9, right, where it used to be, and now it's an arm's length transaction,
right,
meaning
we can't take it directly from the lender anymore.
Yeah.
I do have lender clients that I do work for, but the work goes through a appraisal management company. Yeah, Frank Dodd changed a lot of things in appraising, some for the good and sadly a lot for the bad. I touched on one right there is a lot of the work goes to bid. So the appraisal management companies are looking for one thing, to get the appraisals done at the lowest price possible. And sadly, it's become a profit point where they pay the appraiser X amount and charge the borrower Y amount. And boy, they can be, well, I'll give you an example. I did one not too long ago just because I wanted to know the property. It was local. It was similar to a home I own. I said, hey, I want to do this appraisal. So I bid it very low. I bid it at 280, which is well below what I normally get.
Meaning you told the bank, hey, I'll do it for this amount. So boom,
and of
you
course
got the job.
They took me right away. And then the poor guy tells me, now under penalty of death, we can't tell the borrower how much we get paid. That's one thing I'd like to see change actually in appraising. Some states have allowed now that the appraiser puts the fee within the appraisal report saying, hey, this is what I got paid. And this poor guy was paying $1,100 for an appraisal I was doing for $280. And it was, those times can be disheartening. Sadly, his credit wasn't real credit worthy. And I really think that sadly, a lot of times the appraisal process has become kind of a profit point for a lot of the banks, because they know that they can charge the borrower one and pay us another. And regardless of whether the loan is processed or goes through, they'll make money in that process. Let's get back into purchases. Now, here's a little tip for you. If you have an independent fee appraiser show up and do a purchase for you, it's a good sign for you, because a lot of times I will look at things, and if the purchase makes sense to me, the purchase price is within the range that I feel is fair, I'll do the work. I have to say, Darryl, I turn down more work than I take now.
So when you get an order, you go out, you make an appointment to go see the house.
Sure.
Let me ask you this. What things really increase value of homes per the appraiser? For example, I always ask people, I get the one question is pool. Hey, I got a pool. Does that increase the value?
I used to, years ago, when I was kind of starting in the business, I would go to NAR meetings and I would kind of explain, because there's still kind of a mystery about the appraisal process. And I had an agent tell me one day, I just hear that you adjust pools at $10,000 and that's all you do. And I'm like, what? Then I explained to her I recently did a property that where a fireman had spent $250,000 putting a pool in. So absolutely, I gave him more than $10,000, for his pool. But
yeah, I got posed that question by a client once. They were telling me they had a 35-year-old pool. Should we redo it or bury it? And I said, and I put it on a website full of real estate agents who wanted to get their opinions on it as well. And it was overwhelming that if the pool accented the backyard, then redo it, meaning there was a pool, grass area, and a patio, opposed to some houses, which you may see, where like the whole backyard's pool. But in any event, so yeah, I guess it would depend. Every
It
pool's
can be
different.
quite expensive now to fill a pool because you have to do it. It can be very expensive. I can tell you from an appraisal standpoint, pools can be a little problematic. By the way, a pool has to be operational, have to have water in it for us to call it a pool, to give you an adjustment or give you a credit for it. I get this question a lot. It's like, what can I do? And it was funny. I did a house not too long ago in Long Beach, and it was a 5-bedroom, 1-bath home. And I had the owner, they were doing a refi, and they said,
I hope they have all sons.
yeah,
No, just kidding.
no, they had 3 daughters actually.
Okay.
So I don't know how the logistics of that. And I said, look, you have functional obsolescence here. No one's going to want this house. It's great you have 5 bedrooms, so you have 1 bath. I said, I can guarantee this. Whatever you spend on putting that extra bath in, you will get it back on appraised value, and you'll get it back in the sale.
It depends on what they're missing.
Right, exactly. I think the old adage is true. White, bright, and light sells homes now. I mean, most of the stuff I'm seeing, and I see about 75 to 100 purchases a year. If it's remodeled, it's done with lighter colors. It's done with white marble. We don't see a lot of granite anymore. All those help. It helps me because then I can pick the better comparables within the market. If you have something that's been well appointed and remodeled, then I can use those remodeled comps that may be significantly higher than just using like trust comps that are in average condition, or maybe something was probate. And it does make a big difference as far as value goes. There are no like set true, it's always from the market. The reality of it, Darryl, if everyone could spend $100,000 on a remodel and get that $100,000 back when they sell or an appraised value, everybody would remodel.
The moral is get your neighbors to sell their houses at high prices.
Yes. Yeah. I always tell people you're better off having the 1,500 square foot house in the 3,000 square foot market. I mean, because tide rises all boats, so to speak. And you're better off, having a smaller home, maybe a little lower value in a higher value area, because it will pull your market prices up.
On that note, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Because I think sometimes, I have to pull comps oftentimes when I sell a house and bring them to the appraiser and say, here's what I think. But
you should do that, by the way. You absolutely should provide. I love that. I mean, when I go to a house and the agent is there, and they're often, if it's a good agent, he will be there when I do the appraisal, and he hands me a file and says, here are the comparables that I used when I did my CMA report. I love that, because hopefully at that point, you know more about the property than I do. Now, I can tell you, once I put pen to paper and do an appraisal, I'll know a little bit about the property and what I feel, the value is. But
there are
that
rules.
is helpful to me. That is really helpful to me. Now, some appraisers, I can tell you, if you may want to just put them in a folder and hand it to them, and don't, hey, let me go over. No. Here's what I used. If this helps you, great. And I do appreciate that.
Well, let me ask you this, because with that being said, there are guidelines, meaning you mentioned, for example, what made me think of this is a 3,000 square foot home, and then you're in a smaller house in a very upscale neighborhood. It'll cause the price to be more valuable. But for a 3,000 square foot home, let's just take that. You have limits in terms of what you're going to use as a comp. I mean, that was talking about value, or do you not? Meaning you can only go 2,500 square foot to 3,500 square foot, or are there any?
Darryl, that's an interesting question, because a lot of people feel, and I get this all the time, well, I hear that you only can use stuff plus or minus 10% of square footage. And that is absolutely not the case. Now, I can say this, the more you kind of go the apples and oranges, let's say I have a property and it's way too big for the market, and I'm using smaller comparables and doing those adjustments. I have to do a lot of explaining, in the appraisal. And that's where appraising gets difficult. If you have something that's kind of an outlier or atypical of the market, certainly you can use comparables within the market that are much different, but then you have to explain, well, why are you doing this? And why are you doing these adjustments? I always tell people, look, I can use anything I want, but then I got to write 2 pages on why I used it, So sadly, appraising has boiled down to this. I'm a one-a-guy day. The average appraisal takes me anywhere from about 6 to 10 hours to put together. Sadly, because of the bid structure that we have, there's a lot of guys trying to make a living, and they're doing 2 a day, or they're doing 3 a day. That's like you trying to do 6 open houses in a day. The quality of your work is really going to suffer if you're trying to limit yourself to about 4 hours to put the appraisal together. Then you're not going to explain. I look at stuff, I review work all the time. A lot of times I'll just talk my clients into, hey, this doesn't make any sense, or there's no real documentation on why he used a comparable. Let's just do another appraisal. And sadly, that's kind of what the case is now, is a lot of guys just trying to make a living, and they're trying to do 2 or 3 appraisals a day, and the quality of work does suffer.
So you can use smaller houses, larger houses. And what about age too? And also, I'm guessing, and just to let our viewers know, that you typically won't, you try to stay as close to the neighborhood as possible unless they don't exist. I mean, sometimes there's not any recent sales, so then you just keep going out. And it's very rare to use a different city. Like if you're on adjacent to another city, would that be fair to say?
My sister lives in Orange, in a little area that's within the Villa Park School District. That's very, very desirable little area. And if I was appraising that house, I would try to stay in that geographic area, and specifically to that particular school district, because it does have a huge effect on value. It does. I have a rule of thumb. I kind of have, it's funny. Every appraiser kind of has their little process, and when I pick comps, I try to start with stuff within the geographic area, obviously within the city. Great if I could even get it in the same track. If I'm getting the same track, I'm getting the same year builds, I'm getting, same lot sizes. And that's where I kind of start, and then I widen out from there. So I usually start there. I mean, the best case scenario is that we have sales within 6 months, right within the track. But then I might go a year out or 16 months out,
talk about that. That's called a time adjustment.
That can be very tough. And we're going into a very interesting market now. I'm seeing a lot of stuff on the second home market, things like in Big Bear. And I've been doing a lot of Big Bear, Palm Springs area of recent, where I'm kind of seeing, wow, it may be time to start doing negative market adjustments, because I do see a year ago sales were a little stronger. So that gets to be a very tough time for appraising, when you have a hugely increasing market and then you have a decreasing market, because then you're using time adjustments, and you have to base those time adjustments on some sort of credible data that you're providing, the reader or the lender, and that can get tough.
I often tell sellers, because sometimes cash buyers think they're more valuable, in which they are. People would rather have a cash buyer, all things being equal, but they become more valuable in a really, really rising a market that's rising fast. But if it's a flatter market, cash buyers are just not that compelling, because it's not necessarily needed. But anyway, I'm sorry, proceed.
No, that's good. I always tell people all the time, I think I've mentioned this to you, is sometimes don't look for the highest offer, look for the most qualified. And if that's a cash buyer and it's the most qualified, then I would absolutely consider that. We're still seeing a lot of cash purchases.
You go to the house, you measure the house, you take pictures of the house, you review all the data in the neighborhood and then their surrounding areas if needed.
I always say this, Darryl, about my job. I take a lot of pride in this part of the job. Is I do feel that there's something of tremendous value to the lender to have somebody physically go look at something and give an opinion. I think I mentioned to you, about every 1 in 20, I send the lender pictures and I go, hey, do you really want a loan on this? Because I had to move dog shit just to see the floor. And they're like, oh, no, we don't want to do that. There is something of value that we go in as appraisers. And then although we're just doing an observation, we're not technically inspecting, unless it's an FHA purchase, then we will do a minor inspection. But we're kind of looking at the overall quality of the home, if it has a lot of deferred maintenance. I did a house recently. It was a Craftsman in Long Beach, 1910 built, and I think that's the last time it was painted. It was 1910. And I had to go to the lender and I said, I don't even know what color this was, because most of it's on the ground, And that's where having a good appraiser come in, because that can open up a can of worms about lead paint abatement and different things that needed to be done to that home. I value that as part of my job, is to go in and just physically look at everything. And a good appraiser will kind of look at everything, conventional lending, certain things just have to be there. The home has to be safe. I did a house recently where it was literally built kind of on a cliff, and the back of the house was only about 3 feet, and then it dropped down about 25 feet, and there was no railing. And there was a young family moving in with kids. How could that possibly be safe for a young family with kids? And
So that has to do with when you said inspection, you don't do inspections. However, you do an overview. Another thing too, like you can't have broken windows. Windows have to be there.
No,
Flooring has to be there.
For conventional lending, certain things, it has to have flooring, by the way.
Yeah.
A home, it can't be down to the subfloor. It has to have flooring. Built-ins have to work. California law requires double strapping of a water heater. We obviously know all that. CO and smoke detectors installed. You'd be surprised on how many purchases I have to condition just for a $25 CO detector, And
yeah, meaning just for the audience, meaning the carbon monoxide detector, the appraiser is the one who verifies that's in there for their bank. So that, along with smoke detectors, different cities will have different regulations on that. But essentially, you need one in every single bedroom in the hallway. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, each bedroom should have a smoke detector. There has to be, if it's single story, it has to have one CO detector, usually in the kitchen. I mean, most units now are combo where there's smoke and CO, built in. They have some great units. And I just bought some for this house. Costco has them on sale. You can get a 2-pack for $40, and they have a 10-year battery. It's a CO and smoke. Yeah, so there's no excuse, because what you don't want is to have the appraisal process or the appraisal condition, because that requires me to, it's just a lot of time now, because I have to go back. I hate to go back.
Yeah. I mean,
we don't make a lot, to do it. I've had agents that, well, you just want to come back. No, I don't ever see this house again. I want to turn in my report and move to the next one. That's the last thing I want to do. A lot of times the fee I get is under $100 to go back and do a reinspection. I really don't want to do that. I honestly used to carry around smoke and CO detectors and just hand them to agents and say, here, put it up, because I don't want to come back. But that was getting too expensive.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Now, you mentioned FHA real quickly. Let's go back to that. What would be the additional inspection that the FHA would require, an FHA loan would require you to do as an appraisal?
Yeah, we look at everything on FHA, and the rule of thumb is that there has to be a certain amount of time, like a roof has to be, I'm not sure the exact amount, but usually it's like 10 or 12 years. We have to basically kind of do an observation of the roof and different things, a water heater, appliances, and kind of are these going to last at least a few years? I'm not sure, because that all keeps changing. But we do look at like foundation. We look under the home and provide a picture for FHA. We look at attics and provide a picture. So what we're looking for when we do that attic pop-in is we are looking at, so what I do is when I do my attics for FHA, I close my eyes for about a minute and I open them. And if I see light coming through the roof, not a good sign, Then I also look for any water damage. Obviously, if we have visible termite damage and droppings, if I see dry rot, if I see a lot of water damage, those are the things that we're kind of noting for FHA. FHA, we are kind of doing an inspection. We're checking. It was funny. I did a house not too long ago, and part of my process for FHA is I go around and I flush every toilet, because every toilet has to work in the home. And I had a lady say, well, you could have asked me to use the toilet. And I said, ma'am, I'm just checking them. I'm not using them. Yeah. And we look at built-ins, so if you have a built-in microwave, if you have a built-in, dishwasher, all that has to be functional and working. Obviously, heater has to work. AC has to work if it's provided in the home. So those are the things we kind of look at. It's a quick, usually I can do an FAA inspection about under an hour. And then I'm looking for any little things that I would consider a safety hazard or a risk. If it's a split level, I mean, is there a huge step where there's not an encasement or something that, just little things like that. It's funny. So FHA inspectors do come behind us and kind of check our work. And I had one guy call out and said, because the grommet was missing for the garbage disposal. And he said, well, that's a safety risk. You should have called it out. Now, okay. So now I do call that out because I was told to, but yeah.
I can get pretty specific.
They do. They can. I can tell you now, FHA, I do call them quite often on FHA and leave it up to them. I'll call the FHA office in Santa Ana and say, hey, this is what I have. Let me send you some pictures. Is this okay? Now, I can tell you quite often they say sure, because with that FHA loan, because comes PMI or mortgage insurance too, that kind of protects them. So a lot of times they will allow certain things. Yeah.
Well, we were talking previously when we were talking, actually, it was a few weeks ago, that you also do a large number of trust evaluations for trusts.
Yeah,
Hey,
trusts
talk to
are
us a
not-
little bit more about that. That's an interesting thing, because I don't know if our audience knows, but a lot of times, or every time, when a person inherits a home, they need to find out what the value of that home was at time of death in order to
Right.
properly do their taxes when they go to sell that home eventually.
Exactly.
And because they get a
Yeah.
step up in basis. And you can actually go back. I don't know if a lot of people sometimes are surprised about this, but you can go do an appraisal from 2010, right?
Oh, 2010 is nothing. Darryl, I did one
Yeah.
1982. Boy, and it was tough to pull because that was kind of pre-internet and pre-MLS. I mean, my life is spent when I'm busy, about 40 hours a week on the MLS doing research is a big part of my job. And a lot of times it's retrospective research. I do a lot of trust work. It's about 70% of my business. And usually, sadly, it's from date of passing or date of death. Let's say you inherited something 10 years ago and it's worth X and now you're selling it. The tax implications are very different on the amortization or what you've earned from when the trust technically took effect to when you do sell it. So that's where usually you get an appraiser to come in and do a retrospective appraisal. That's kind of my specialty. I do a lot of that work. I'm very fortunate to have some very good clients in the South Pass, Pasadena, San Marino, La Cañada, Flint Ridge. I do a lot of that area on a lot of very large estates.
And are your clients estate attorneys? Or?
They are. I was fortunate enough to kind of start with a very good attorney who has about 20 associates, and the associates always seem to kind of spin off and start their own trust firms. And I've kind of have about 4 or 5 of them now I work for in that market, and that's, I don't know how I just started with this one guy, and from 20 years, doing the work, been somewhat competent. He's always used me. He's always referred me to his other attorneys, and I've been fortunate to kind of get that business. But that's usually where most of my trust work is, in that market. Pasadena, South Pass, San Marino, La Cañada, and I see everything. I might do a $1 million house one day, and I'm doing a $25 million estate the next. Yeah.
I'm guessing that the $25 million estates, because I know that in evaluating custom homes and high-end homes, that's a lot more challenging because there's typically fewer comps and you have to make many more adjustments.
Yeah, it can be very challenging. And that is not a 10-hour. That is about a week or sometimes 2 weeks to put together a good, competent appraisal where you're really gleaning through all the data to really try to match up certain things. Because like you said, there may be only 1 or 2 sales that I'm really weighing the entire appraisal on. And it can be challenging. And then, of course, when you're going back retrospective, let's say you're going back 20 years, which is often the case, the data that supports it isn't great. I mean, that's where having good agents like yourself that really do a great job on detailing the property is helpful to us. I read MLS data all day long, believe me. And the better agents that really detail things are really helpful.
For you that have not subscribed yet, please click on that subscribe button. It'll help get this video out to more and more people.